Young Chinese are coming into the continent. What is it that the young Chinese, many of them between ages 20 and 35, what is it that they are seeing in Zambia? That today you go to the streets of Zambia, they are Chinese. What is it that they are seeing in the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town and Pretoria? What is it that they see in South Africa? What is it that they see in Accra, Ghana, in Monrovia, in Nairobi, in Kampala, in Rwanda, in Dar es Salaam that you cannot see?
Hey, Breakdown family. We need to talk. Yes, because in one of my recent episodes, I laid out a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity for Africa created by Trump's trade war with China. Now, if you haven't watched it, the link is in the description. Check it out. I proposed 2 strategic moves that I believe could be a game changer for Africa in this historic moment where the global system, the world order, is being rewritten in real time. I said Africa could use this opportunity to become a manufacturing powerhouse and grab some market share from China here in the US in strategic sectors such as tech, textiles, and green energy. I also said this is the time for the continent to double down on intra-African trade to finally build real continental strength. Now, most of you got it. You saw the vision. You said, yes, it's time for Africa to play chess, not checkers. But some of y'all, you pushed back. You pushed back hard. You said, no, we can't afford to upset China. You said, the West can't be trusted. At least China is helping us. You pointed to roads, airports, and bridges as if that's substantial evidence that China is Africa's friend. Let me be real with you. That left me deeply concerned. Because while we're out here worried about offending our so-called friend, China is out here building an empire on our soil with our resources. Here's the hard truth. China is not our friend, and they will not save Africa. Neither is the US, neither is Europe, neither is Russia. No one is coming because guess what? Africa has no permanent friends, only permanent interests. And the only real friend Africa needs and should rely on is Africa. Ghana needs South Africa. South Africa needs Egypt. Egypt needs Ethiopia. From the west to the east, the continent's future lies in the alliances that we build with each other at this time, not in begging for crumbs from global powers. Every time we outsource our future to someone else, as we've been doing, whether it's Beijing or Washington, we lose leverage, we lose independence, and we lose the game. Now, this isn't about hating China, no. But I have a problem with the idea that Africans always have to pick a side instead of choosing ourselves first. And I'm also tired of Africa being the engine, but never in the driver's seat. This moment right here, it's about understanding the game we're in and playing it with vision, playing it to win. Because if we keep confusing infrastructure loans with love, we'll wake up one day owning nothing, running nothing, but yet answering to everyone. So today on The Breakdown, we're asking the real question. And no, it's not, is China helping or hurting Africa? But why is Africa still fueling China's rise when we could be building our own? It's going to be a good one today. And I need you to stay with me till the end because this is a conversation I need us to have together and also to amplify. Not just here in the comments, but at our dinner tables with our leaders and within our social and political circles. Guys, we need to start having a different conversation about Africa. We need to start moving from talk to action. And it starts with us right now. So I want to hear from you. And I want you to share this episode widely with everyone that needs to hear it because Africa has an opportunity. And if we don't sound it loud enough, we will miss it. Yet again. Now, before we dive in, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss another critical conversation like this. And hey, if you're ready to go deeper, and I hope you are, I want to personally invite you to join our growing membership community where the real conversation happens. It's a space for thinkers, for change makers, and truth seekers like you to connect, contribute, and help shape real solutions. Just click on join or head to the membership tab to explore our tiers and benefits. And your support also helps keeps The Breakdown and Pan and Genius TV independent and unapologetic. And I can't wait to connect with you inside. All right, now let's get into it. So let's start with some facts to give us some context here. China is now Africa's single largest trading partner, bigger than the US, the EU, or anyone else. In 2023, trade between China and Africa hit over $280 billion. And in 2024, that number jumped to $295.5 billion, a 6.1% increase. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the problem. This isn't a balanced relationship. Let's break it down. Africa's exports to China totaled $116.8 billion, up 6.9% from the previous year. China's exports to Africa reached $178.8 billion, up 3.5%. Now that's a trade deficit of nearly $62 billion for Africa. But the real issue, no, isn't even the numbers. It's the nature of what's being traded. Roughly 89% of Africa's exports to China are raw materials from the extractive sector. Things like copper, crude oil, iron ore, aluminum, diamonds, cobalt. These are the lifeblood of China's industrial engine, fueling its factories, tech, construction, and electronic sectors. Now, what does China send back to us? 94% of China's exports to Africa are manufactured goods. Talking telecommunications equipment, machinery, electronics, processed fabrics, and clothing. In other words, China takes Africa's raw materials, adds value, turns them into finished products, and sells them right back to the continent. And not just to us, but to the entire world, including the US. So let's be real. Africa is fueling China's industrial growth. And China, they know it. That's why they're out here building roads, ports, and bridges. Not out of generosity, but out of strategic necessity. They need our resources. They're investing in our infrastructure to make sure those resources keep flowing smoothly to them, to move them faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. So here's my question. If Africa has the resources to power China's industrial rise, why can't we use those same resources to build our own factories, our own supply chains, our own economic engine? Why are we still exporting raw materials instead of refining them right here on the continent? Why are we importing what we could and should be producing ourselves? Let's be honest. The roads, ports, and railways China is building aren't gifts. They're tools of control. They're meant to look like progress, but in reality, they're infrastructure for extraction to make it easier and cheaper for China to access the very resources we should be using to transform Africa. Now, I want to show you this video of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bennett in a recent interview describing U.S. policy toward Latin America as, get this, China policy in disguise. And here's what he said.
Well, I think that might be a good description, because what we are trying to keep from happening is what has happened on the African continent, where China has signed a number of these kind of rapacious deals marked as aid, where they are really, they've taken mineral rights, they've added huge amounts of debt onto these countries' balance sheets. It's undisclosed to any of the other international organizations. They've got tolling arrangements. So they're guaranteeing that future generations are going to be poor and without resources. And we don't want that to happen any more than it already has in Latin America.
Now listen, I know what you're thinking, okay? America, warning Africa about exploitation, the irony is definitely deafening. And you're not wrong to be skeptical. The U.S. has its own history of exploitation and interference across the global south. But here's the thing. Sometimes even your rival, they tell the truth. And hate or love Trump, his presidency, especially his nationalist, anti-China stance, forced the U.S. establishment to start exposing what China is really doing in countries that they see as competition. They're lifting the curtain on China's playbook. And let's be clear, it's not out of concern for us, but to weaken China's grip. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't listen carefully, right? Because what they're describing, it tracks with what many of us have been warning about for years. So yes, the messenger is messy. But the message here, we'd be foolish to ignore it. The loans China is giving to Africa, they're not acts of kindness. They're leverage. Here's how it works. A country takes out a massive loan from China. That loan is often tied to infrastructure projects built by Chinese firms. The projects may or may not deliver real returns, but the debt, it stays. And when countries can't pay, China extends the terms, but always on its own conditions. It's a rinse and repeat cycle of dependency. They don't want us to become competitors, no. They want us to stay small, to stay reliant, to stay grateful. So let's ask the hard question here. At that point, what are we, really? Are we a partner? Or are we a pet, fed just enough to stay loyal, but never enough to grow on our own? Let's be honest, this dynamic mirrors the same colonial trade structures that stunted Africa's development for centuries. And if we're serious about real freedom, economic freedom, then we've got to break that cycle, not just by resisting China's influence, but by being intentional about building our own industrial future. And believe it or not, the perfect storm for that shift might just be happening right now. Because while Africa has been stuck in this lopsided trade cycle with China, something major just happened on the global stage. And most of us aren't paying enough attention to it. Trump's trade war with China blew a hole in the global supply chain. And again, whether you like him or not, that disruption, it created an opening. New tariffs, new restrictions, political tension, and a growing sense of distrust. If you've been watching closely, you've probably seen the headlines. China recently exposed the supply chains of major luxury brands, revealing confidential sourcing details and trade flows.
Do you recognize this style, this bag? Of course you do.
A viral TikTok trend undercutting some of fashion's most luxurious brands by claiming China is the original equipment manufacturer, or OEM.
For the past more than 30 years, we have been the OEM factory for most of the luxury brands around the world. Gucci, Prada, Coach, Louis Vuitton.
Your made in Italy Gucci, 80% come from Chinese factory. They just add the logo in Europe to make you pay the price of 10 times.
High-end brands dispute that. Hermes says it makes 55% of its objects in its own exclusive workshops in France. Louis Vuitton says its leather goods are exclusively produced in its workshops in France, Spain, Italy, and the US, while Gucci says 95% of Gucci suppliers are in Italy. Experts tell Global News the truth is murky.
Now, if you're a U.S. company sourcing from China, that's a major red flag. Because now you're not just thinking about tariffs, right? You're thinking about intellectual property theft, trade secrets being leaked. You're thinking about sudden regulatory changes and the real cost of overdependence on a geopolitical rival. Let me be real. The China-U.S. relationship will never be the same again. The trust is broken. The political climate is shifting. And the business risks, they've never been higher. All of this has made it riskier and more expensive for American companies to rely on China for manufacturing, assembly, and supply chain continuity. And that's exactly why every major company is now looking to diversify, to de-risk, to relocate, and to rebuild their global sourcing networks. Because the truth is, you're still going to buy your iPhone, right? You still need your iPhone. Those Nike sneakers, you're still going to buy them. Consumers are still going to need what they need. Apple is not going anywhere. Amazon is not going anywhere. And these big brands, Apple, Google, Nike, Tesla, Pfizer, Amazon, you name it, they're all looking for alternatives right now, safer alternatives. And guess where they're looking? Places like India and Vietnam top the list.
If we're talking about Apple, I don't believe that they're going to be moving their supply chain to the US. Maybe it'll happen in our lifetime, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 10 years.
What happens if tariffs on China continue to exist? There's no exemption for Apple. Can Apple satisfy US customers through India? It seems, by the way, it would seem to defeat the purpose of the tariffs, but...
Well, today, no. But I would say within a year or two, yes. Right now, they can probably fulfill maybe 75% of the U.S. demand they need in India. If they ramped up and burned the midnight oil for the next few months, they would probably be able to do it. But they would be able to do it pretty cleanly, I would think, in a year or two from now. They're already 30, 40, maybe a little bit more than that million units. The U.S. represents probably 100 million units per year, maybe a little bit less. So less than rest of world. So, you know, you're quickly getting there.
What does it do to the relationship, though, between Apple and China, if that ultimately is what it does?
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room, because China can't be too happy here. And I think the argument that Apple is trying to make is how important China is to the rest of the world, right? Still needing to produce 102 million iPhones. You're still producing all of those phones for the rest of the world.
So here's the trillion-dollar question. If U.S. companies are pulling out of China, why aren't they coming to Africa? Why isn't that even a consideration? Africa is not even a thought in the picture. Right now, Africa is supplying the raw materials, the cobalt, the lithium, the rare earths that make tech innovation possible. We're literally fueling the digital revolution, but we're not doing the assembly, the packaging, the exporting. We're not owning the value-added part of the chain, the part where the real wealth is created. And that's a big problem. It's a multi-trillion-dollar problem, y'all. Now, some of you are saying, no, we can't trust America. And I get that. I really do. The continent has been burned too many times by colonizers, by aid games, by shady trade deals. That's real. The skepticism is earned here. But let's be clear. This is not about trust. It's about business. It's about going after an opportunity when it presents itself. And let me ask you this. Do you think China trusts the U.S.? I'll answer that for you. No, they don't. Absolutely not. In fact, the U.S. is China's number one geopolitical rival. They're in full-on tech war, economic war, military posturing, the whole thing. But did that stop China from doing business with the U.S.? From becoming America's number one supplier? If you need it, we got it. We'll give it to you. No, because in business, you don't always need trust. You need policies, leverage, contracts, and strategy. That's why we have contracts in the first place. Listen, if trust were the foundation of every deal, legal departments wouldn't exist, would they? But they do. Because smart nations and smart companies know that you protect your interests through well-negotiated terms, not wishful thinking. So let's remove the emotion from this conversation for a second and look at the real opportunity here. Let's look at some numbers. The global tech industry is projected to be worth $11 trillion by 2026. Let that sink in. This is one of the fastest growing, highest value sectors on earth, driven by everything from smartphones and laptops to EVs, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence. And guess who's capturing a massive share of that value? You already know. China. China's high-tech industry, including IT, manufacturing, renewable energy, and more, was valued at an estimated $3.8 trillion in 2023 and is projected to grow to $7.3 trillion by 2030. Good for them. But why? What are they doing right? Because they don't just supply minerals. They own the factories. They control the assembly lines. They dominate the export lanes. Meanwhile, Africa, despite fueling this industry with raw materials like cobalt, lithium, and copper, is capturing only a tiny fraction of the value. In 2024, Africa's entire tech startup funding was just $3.2 billion. Compare that to a single Chinese province's investment in one semiconductor park. It's not even close. No. Now here's where it gets real. What if Africa could capture just 10% of what China currently earns from tech manufacturing? That's hundreds of billions of dollars in annual revenue. That's hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs. That's infrastructure we build and own on our own. Products that we export and value we create instead of giving it away and taking high-interest loans to build out infrastructure. It would be one of the most transformative economic shifts in our modern history. It would shift our economies from resource-driven to industry-driven. It would build supply chains that keep wealth circulating within Africa, not bleeding out of it. And most importantly, it would give Africa a seat at the global innovation table, not as a supplier, but as a key player. Listen, Africa has what the world needs. 80% of the world's cobalt is right here in the Congo. Vast reserves of copper, lithium, and manganese. Africa's got the youngest workforce in the world. Massive amounts of undeveloped land. And a growing consumer market of 1.5 billion people. The foundation is here. So now imagine if we built special economic zones for tech and electronics manufacturing, STEM training hubs to develop skilled workers, modern port and logistics systems that streamline exports, and public-private partnerships that bring in Apple, Samsung, Intel, Amazon, and more. We could become a global hub for smartphones, EV batteries, laptops, telecom equipment, and next-gen hardware. And not just mining the minerals, but owning the machines. And the door has swung wide open for us right now. Now that the US, China's largest customer, is pushing to friendshore manufacturing, to move production to countries that are geopolitically aligned and economically stable. Africa can offer both if we show up prepared. But that requires us to be intentional, to be coordinated, and to start now. We shouldn't be sitting there waiting for these companies to knock on our door. We should be pitching to them, reaching out and saying, hey, Apple, build your next assembly plant right here. Hey, Nike, set up production in Ethiopia, Ghana, or Kenya. We've got the talents and the skill. This is our moment to get in the game, not to beg, not to chase, but to use our leverage. Present bold, coordinated proposals that say, we're open for business, but this time is going to be on our terms. So here's the next big challenge, and it's one of the reasons we're not capturing the market right now. Africa shows up to the global table fragmented. Ghana with 30 million people, Namibia with 2 million over there, Ethiopia with 121 million, but negotiating alone. Now that's not power, that's puzzle pieces. Meanwhile, countries like China, they are negotiating as one, with a long-term vision, a unified voice, and coordinated strategy. That's how they win. So here's the result. When Africa shows up divided, we leave with crumbs. Let me give you a real-world example. I was recently in a conversation with an international food chain, pitching the African market. I said, you should come to Ghana. There's a market, there's demand, there's talent. You know what they said? We like Ghana, but we won't invest unless there's a regional strategy. Not just Ghana, but also Nigeria, Togo, Benin. We want to negotiate with the region, not a small isolated market. That's how we scale. That's how we justify our investment. Well, it made sense. But just like that, the conversation ended. Why? Because I had no regional body to call, no unified authority to say, let's build this together. They're willing to invest if we can give them access to the regional market. And that's Africa's core problem here. We talk about scale, but we don't negotiate like a bloc. We talk about opportunity, but we don't show up with coordination or clarity. So we keep missing opportunities. Until we start acting like a market of 1.5 billion people, we will keep being treated like a collection of small countries with small bargaining power. We don't need more summits. We need strategy. We need the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to go from paper to power. We need regional coalitions that can walk into the Apple or Nike boardroom and say, we've got land in Kenya. We've got labor in Ghana. We've got minerals in the DRC. What do you need? And here's what we need in return. That's how you close deals. That's how you build empires. That's how you win. This is the game China played, and played very well. They didn't need to trust the US to become its number one trade partner. They just needed to be necessary. So let me ask you, why can't Africa do the same? This is our moment to think like power players, to remove the emotion and to step into rooms with leverage, clarity, and an unapologetic agenda. Because this isn't about whose side we choose. It's about choosing ourselves and showing up with a plan that makes the world take notice. Now, I know some of you will say, but Trump is chaotic, he's dangerous, we shouldn't get involved. I get it. Trump is spiraling right now. But here's the thing. He doesn't represent every company in America.
At the same time, they're increasingly the multinational companies, the Nikes, the Starbucks, the McDonald's of the world, are very worried about what's happening in these other countries and how they are being perceived. Are people going to buy their products? Are people going to walk into a McDonald's? Are they going to walk into a Starbucks? Are people going to want to take jobs at these companies? You know, the American dream provided a remarkable halo over American businesses doing business abroad for many, many years. And it feels like a lot of these CEOs are saying that that halo is disappearing.
In fact, many U.S. corporations are deeply uncomfortable with his policies. I work with some of them. They know their future depends on being global, being diverse, being adaptable. They understand that without a multicultural strategy, a global strategy, they won't survive long term. What do these companies want? Deals, good deals, strategic ones. If we bring compelling proposals to the table, show them how partnering with Africa cuts their costs, reduces risk, and creates long-term value, they will come. They will invest. Not because they love us, right? Let's be honest. But because it makes business sense. This is the moment for Africa to think boldly, act strategically, and show up with a plan. Not to beg, not to follow, but to lead. This is our moment to flip the script, to move from being at the bottom of the value chain to owning more of it. Because if we don't step up, someone else will. India will step up. And we'll be back where we've always been. Rich in resources, poor in returns. So where does all of this leave us, my people? Let me be clear again, this episode is not about hating China, okay? It's not about blindly trusting the West either. And I'm not saying Africa should cut ties with China. Absolutely not. We should keep trading with China. But we should know exactly what we want out of that relationship. And It has to be more than roads and ports. This is about Africa finally choosing power over dependency, strategy over sentiment, unity over fragmentation. Because let's be honest, the same American companies that have been building factories and supply chains in China for the past 20 years, we can bring some of them to Africa too. And now is the moment. We just have to show up ready with vision, with infrastructure, with a plan. For too long, Africa has been treated like a pawn in a global power game, pulled between China, the US, Europe, and whoever else wants a piece of us, while we act like we're just lucky to be invited. But now we have leverage. The global order is shifting. The US needs new partners, new suppliers. China is facing internal economic pressure. Europe is scrambling to stay relevant. Everyone is looking for new partners. And we hold some strong and powerful cards. But here's the truth. Cards mean nothing if you don't play them. And Africa has been holding a royal flush while acting like we've got nothing but scraps. Again, we have the resources, the youth, the land, the geopolitical value. What we lack is coordination, vision, bold leadership, and sometimes just the courage to say, we choose ourselves first. We choose us. So what needs to happen now? First, African governments need to stop thinking like individual countries and start acting like a collective force. The African Continental Free Trade Area must move from paper to power, from signing agreements to shaping global deals. Second, we need to invest not just in digging resources out of the ground, but in processing them, manufacturing them, exporting them as finished goods. Transform it on African soil. Own the value. Keep the wealth. And how do we do that? Well, let's start by bringing our billionaires to the table. According to Forbes, there are 22 of them. Let's find out what we can build with our own capital before we go knocking on foreign doors. Let's reach out to the top global companies, tech, textiles, pharma, energy. Let's get in the room and ask one simple question. What do you need? And how can Africa deliver it? Then, when they lay their cards on the table, we lay ours too. Clearly, boldly, without apology. This is what we need. This is what it would take to partner with us. If you're coming to Africa, we want you to come to build, not to extract. It's time to play hardball. Whether it's China, the US, Europe, or anyone else, we come to the table with a clear ask and a long-term strategy and the unity to back it up. And most importantly, we need to believe in ourselves, not in some surface level feel-good way, but with policies, capital, institutions, and cooperation that prove it. Because this is no longer a moment to beg. It's a moment to bargain, to build, to lead. So where do we go from here? At the end of the day, this episode isn't just about China. It's not even about trade. It's about Africa deciding what kind of future it wants. Because for too long, we've let other nations define our role. We're either suppliers, borrowers, consumers, or clients. But what if we decided to flip the script right now? The world is shifting. The opportunities are there. They become available. But the clock is ticking. What if we chose to stop fueling someone else's rise and start investing in our own? What if we didn't just build roads to move minerals out of the continent, but factories to turn those minerals into phones, batteries, and high-value exports? Because to those of you who believe China is saving Africa, let me say this clearly, it's not. Loans don't build a nation. Vision does. Ownership does. Strategy does. And I say it again. No one is going to save Africa but Africans. Not China, not the US, not Europe, not the UN. Only Africa can save itself. So the real question is, when will we finally choose to help ourselves first? Because the world is watching, and history only remembers the ones who made bold moves when it mattered most. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think Africa needs to do right now to build real economic power? And do you agree that Trump's trade war with China is an opportunity for the continent? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You know I'm in there with you. And if this episode sparked something in you, don't just scroll past it. Hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and if you're ready to go deeper, I invite you to join our membership community where we're having the real conversations and working toward the bold solutions that will reshape the future. That's it for today's Breakdown family. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng, and until next time, take care. Hey you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.